Dear friends, today I'm going to talk about Hinduphobia. Of course, you've heard about Islamophobia, and after the election of Donald Trump in the United States, there's a fear amongst the Muslims of the United States and other Muslims who might travel in the States that they're going to be discriminated against. That fear is justified partly because Mr. Trump has announced very strong measures against Muslims, especially those who come from countries that foster terrorism, such as Pakistan. On the other side, if we look at statistics, most of the terror acts in the last 30, 40 years since the Palestine of Arafat blew up planes. And in the last 30 years, most of the terrorist acts in the world have been done by Muslims. So, although Muslims feel that they are unfairly targeted, because it is true that the majority of Muslims are peaceful and it's only a minority that resorts to violence, there is some justification in Islamophobia. And we can also say that the silent majority of the Muslims, though, as we said, it is peaceful, never protests collectively against the violence that is done in the name of the Quran. Because obviously, most of these terrorists apply the Quran to the letter. And they say it themselves. It's not that we are making that comment. They say it themselves that, we apply the Quran about infidels, about jihad. And if you do read the Quran, you'll see that it is true that there are many passages in the Quran that advocate violence and terror against those who do not believe in Islam. Now, the Quran should be reformed, of course. And the other fault, of the collective Muslims is that they refuse to say that. There are very, very few Muslims in the world, they're counted on 10 fingers maybe, who dare to say that, yes, we need to reform the Quran. The Quran was written, in a time where it was fine, where beheading and flogging and cutting fingers and stoning women and killing infidels was fine. In the time there was so much violence in the Middle Age, and this was okay in those times. But it isn't anymore today. You cannot apply the Quran that was written, in the 7th century to the 21st century. And every religion goes through reform, including Christianity. So the other collective fault of the Muslims in the world is that nobody dares say that the Quran needs to reform. So, though, in principle we are against any phobia, there is some justification in Islamophobia. People nowadays are afraid of Islamic terrorism. They're afraid of refugees who swamp Europe, and other countries and do not integrate and keep on, living within themselves and even sheltering terrorism. So Islamophobia is somehow justified. Now, there is something else called Hinduphobia. Have you heard about Hinduphobia? Hinduphobia is very much a phenomenon today. Very much a phenomenon. You see it in India, for instance. Hindus are the majority in India, the overwhelming majority, 75 to 80%. And yet, they're considered like a minority. They're treated like a minority. If you look at Kashmir, for instance, I covered Kashmir extensively, and I saw that in Kashmir, in those days, in the 90s, till maybe the early 2000s, in those days, all the Western journalists and the Indian journalists, led by Mark Tully, who may be a nice man, but in those days, he kept saying that India accuses Pakistan to foster terrorism in Kashmir, meaning that it is not true. Of course, we know today it is true. It's in the open. But in those days, the journalists in Srinagar only defended the Muslims, the human rights of the Muslims at the hand of the bad Indian army. And I was a witness of that. And when the first Hindu leaders were killed in the end of the 80s by what was then the GKLF. I was there too, and I interviewed some of them, some famous lawyers and surgeons like Dr. Tiku, and they were murdered. And then later, 350,000 Hindus of Kashmir, the Kashmiri Pandits, fled their homeland, where they had been for generations, where they left their lands and their property, without firing a shot in self-defense. And they were threatened, either you convert or you get killed. And many of them got killed. Then again, nobody cared. Even today, nobody really cared about these refugees, these Hindus. This is also Hinduphobia. When a Christian is killed in India, I remember many, many years ago, the terrible assassination of Graham Staines and his children who were burnt, alive. Terrible crime, but for months and months and months, the Indian media kept, and the Western media, of course, kept, arguing about the terrible thing that the Hindus were doing. When a Muslim is killed, in Dadri recently, about this cow, he was suspected of having killed a cow. Again, the media, which mostly is Hindu, mostly owned and written by Hindus, goes on and on and on about the killing of that Muslim, and rightfully so. But when a Hindu is killed, and there are many Hindus killed nowadays, in Kerala, Hindus of the RSS, of the BJP, it's only 2 lines in the newspapers. Nobody gives a damn. So this is a question it's an important question. Is the life of a Muslim or a Christian infinitely more important to the media than that of a Hindu? You tell me. Now, another form of Hinduphobia is the intense dislike in the media for Hindu political leaders. There is a near hate in the media. It's a little better today about the Hindu political leaders. It started with the RSS. When I came as a journalist in India, I also thought the RSS was demons. They were murderers. It's always been said that the man who killed Mahatma Gandhi was a member of the Nathuram Ghosh, was a RSS member, but he wasn't actually. He was part of the Hindu Mahasabha, and he had even cut his links with them. So I was expecting, demons, and when I went to the headquarters in Delhi, in Jangpura, I was very surprised to see the old fuddy-duddies in their oversized brown shorts, and talking quite good sense, talking things that I had read in Sri Aurobindo, and it didn't make sense that they were demonized so much, This is a British legacy, actually. The British started making fun of Hindus, the British media, long ago in the 19th century, ridiculing the Hindus and the cow worship and the puja and the temples. This is just, Hindu intellectuals who taken up what the British taught them. It's just Macaulay's inheritance, and it's terrible. We saw also that hate that the Indian media and the foreign media has for Hindu leaders with Mr. Modi when he was Gujarat Chief Minister. Now, I'm not going to talk at length about the Gujarat riots, but riots like that do not start in a day. They're the product of decades and sometimes centuries of pent-up anger and frustration, and the burning alive of the Hindu car sevaks, in the Sabarmati train was just the spark that ignited the fire. There's 56 people, and out of them 32 women and children burnt alive like animals just because they were Hindus. This is something terrible. Okay, the crowd went down in the streets in fury. But the media never accused the crowd. There were like 100,000 Hindus who went down in the streets, from the Dalits to the Brahmins, and just in fury and killed Muslims. And Hindus were killed too in these riots. People forget that. But the media went after Mr. Modi only. They targeted Mr. Modi. Whether he called the army in time or not, this is something that we can debate about. But they just targeted him. Why didn't they target the Gujaratis, who are educated, good people, ancient people, and today even produce brilliant businessmen and produce the Mahatma Gandhi and writers? And Why did they target and still target Mr. Modi like the New York Times does? This is again Hinduphobia. We see that in the Indian media, among the Indian intellectuals, the most brilliant ones, they're all against Hindus. The Hindus, of course, but they're all against Hindus. And for what reason? Hindus are the most tolerant people in the world. India is the only country that accepted in its midst all the persecuted religious minorities in the world, from the Jews of Jerusalem. India is the only country where Jews were never persecuted. All the other countries, Jews were killed and there were pogroms against them, to the Tibetans to death. And the Parsis, and the Armenians and the Christian Syrians, Every community found refuge in India. Why? Not because of the Muslims, not because of the Christians, because Muslims and Christians still today believe that there's only one true God, but because of the Hindus. We recognize the fact that God manifests, different times, different names, that it can be he or it can be she. It's the only country in the world that, Hindus accept that God can be she, that an avatar can be a she, that a vibhuti can be a she. The concept of the Shakti is something very unique. Hindus never try to, impose their religion on others. Never. Christianity did, by force. They wiped out entire people in South America, the Aztecs, the Incas. Of course, the Muslims did, they wiped out entire civilizations, converted by the sword, entire countries, entire countries, Even the Buddhists did. The Buddhists sent missionaries, to teach Buddhism to Sri Lanka and Burma and China. Hindus never tried to impose their faith by force or by peace. Never. They never invaded other countries. Hindus are the only people in the world who never invaded other countries to impose their faith. Even today, Hindu is capable of going to a mosque, going to a church. I'm married to a Hindu. She went to church with my father without any problem. Can a Muslim do that? So why is there Hinduphobia? It's a complete paradox. It's a complete paradox. And we see it in the West also. In many Western universities, especially in the United States, there are Hindus who are professors of history, of religion, and they go after their own religion, and they demonize India, and they demonize Mr. Modi. This is absolutely wrong, and we need to fight against this. And you can fight, by writing to newspapers, and by posting comments, by writing on Facebook. Every time you see something that is Hinduphobia, please react. You will do something good for the Hindus, who are wonderful people and whom I will continue to defend. Namaste.